Hey guys, welcome. This is lesson 21. And lesson 21 is going to be a little bit different today, and it's going to be kind of complex. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. But we're basically explaining the size of the product and relate fraction and decimal equivalents to multiplying by a fraction of 1. Basically, we're doing some scaling. We're making multiplying by something that's equivalent to 1 to change the number so that we can convert things to decimals. And so you'll see where I'm going with this. What I want to start out with is just an example of something here. So I have two halves, and I'm going to multiply it by 3/4. Okay, and the product of here, if I do 2 times 3 would be 6, and 2 times 4 would be 8. So 2 halves times 3/4, and our product is 6/8. And 6/8 is equivalent to 3/4. It's the same thing, right? If I reduce that down, I would get 3/4. And so what we can show with this is we can show that we can multiply something 3/4 by something that's an equivalent to 1, because that's what 2 halves is, right? And ultimately get something that looks different. Now, while it's the same value, it has different digits, and it's a different number, 6/8. So 3/4 is 6/8. All we did was multiply it by 2 halves. Like I said before, 2 halves is equivalent to 1. There are other fractions that we could do to multiply by something to get 1 as well, right? If I think about 1, I could think about 3/3, or 5/5, or 10, or 100 1/100ths. I could do a million 1/1,000,000ths, and they would all be equivalent to 1. And so what I can do is I can take any of those things. I could take, let's say 3/4, and I can multiply it by 6/6, and I would get 18/24. And 18/24 would be equivalent to 3/4. It's the same thing. All I've done is multiplied it by a fraction that's equivalent to 1. All right. So if where this comes in handy, and where we're going with this is let's try this. Let's say 1/5. Let's say I want to turn 1/5. I want to express it as a decimal. Decimals are things, if I do like this, like I have 3/10, right? I can't just put 1/5 straight up in there. I can't just do that, right? Because that's 5/10, and 1/5 does not equal 5/10, right? So if I have 1/5, and let's go ahead, we're going to multiply it by a fraction that's equivalent to 1. We're going to multiply it by 2 halves. Now the reason I've chosen 2 halves is, let's see, if I multiply 1 times 2 is 2, and if I multiply 5 times 2, I get 10. And that 10th is going to be important, right? Because I can rename this as a decimal. 2/10 I can write as this, 2/10, right? I can do, let's do 2/5. And if I want to turn 2/5, I want to be able to express that as a decimal. I would do the same thing. I know I can turn my 5 into a 10 by multiplying it by 2. So let's do the same bottom and top. So 2 times 2 is 4. That would give me 4/10, or I can write it as this. Let's try, I don't know, 3/5. Same thing. Multiply it by 2 halves, because I need to get my tenths. 3 times 2 is 6. That gives me with 6/10. So I can express these as decimals because I can relate them to tenths. I can turn the 5 into a 10, and I do it by multiplying it by 2. And whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top, so that my number is equivalent. So let's move up. Let's try a different number. We know that we can do fifths and turn them into tenths. We can turn numbers into tenths, and that's an easy way to put it into a decimal. What if I get something like this, though? This is another benchmark fraction. What about 1/4? Can I easily turn fourths into tenths? You can't. There's not a number I can multiply 4 by to get to 10. I can't do it. Times 3? No. So 1/4. Well, what's one way that I can express fourths as a decimal? We know what I know about fourths is. I know it's a quarter, right? And a quarter is 25 cents, isn't it? Oh, 25. Let's do this. Oh my gosh, I just had a brain fire. Is 25 cents, right? Well, I know that I can express 1/4 as 0.25, right? That's 1/4. This is right here 25 hundredths, or one quarter, right? 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. There's 1/4 there's 4 quarters in a dollar, and one of those would be 25 out of 100. So I can express 1/4 as 25 hundredths. How do I turn 1/4 into 1/100ths? I know I need to get it into 25 hundredths. Well, that would be easy. I know 1 times something is 25. Well, I know that something has got to be 25. And I know if I'm doing this, I'm multiplying it by a fraction that's equivalent to 1. This right here is equivalent to 1, 25/25. So 1/4 times 25/25 equals 25/100ths, which I know I can also write as 25/100ths. So we have the option of turning something into tenths, if you go tenths, or 100ths, and you can easily write down either one of those as a decimal, right? We sure can. Is there another way that I could do my 25 hundredths? What could I do? I could turn my hundredths. What could I turn my hundredth into that I could also write? We did tenths. We did hundredths. We also know that we could do thousandths, right? And I could just multiply this by 10 over 10, couldn't I? To get, what would I get? If I did 25/100ths times 10 over 10, I would get 250 thousandths, right? And 250 thousandths looks like this, 250 thousandths. Now that is equivalent to 25 hundredths, they're the same thing. So another way I can do this is I can try to multiply something by something else to get to 1,000. This was a two-stepper. I didn't need to do that, but I wanted to prove that I could get 2 thousandths and write that out as a decimal as well. Let's try another number. Let's try 1/8. Eighths are kind of tricky. Can eighth become a 10? No. Can 8 become 100? No. 10 times 8 is 80, and 8 can't turn into 20. The only option I have left would be 1,000. Can 8 go into thousandths? Let's try. Let's divide 1,000 by 8. 8 goes into 10 one time as 8. I'm left with 2. 8 goes into 20 2 times, and it's 16. That leaves me with 4. Hey, look at this, 40. 8 goes into 40 5 times. So 1/8 could equal 125 thousandths, right? You see that? 1,000 divided by 8, 125. I can get it by multiplying by 125 over 125. Oh, 52. So let's try this. Let's try 2/8. How could I express 2/8 as a decimal? Well, let's try our 125 125ths. I got that number because when I divided 1,000 by 8, I got that. Well, I know 8 times 125 equals 1,000. So I don't need to worry too much about that. And 125 times 2, well, I would just double this. So that would be 250 1,000ths. So 2/8 would equal 250 1,000ths. Interesting. isn't that? Because 2/8, 2/8 can also be what? Yeah, I can write that as 1/4. Okay, let's try another one. 1/20th. How could I express 20ths as a decimal? Well, I know 20ths. I'm either going to go tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. Okay, and you got to pick one of those that you're going to try to turn this into. I know 20 can turn into 100, and I know I do 20 times 5, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So I'm going to take my 1/20th and I'm going to multiply it by 5/5, and I know that 20 times 5 would be 100. And 1 times 5 would be 5. So 5/100ths or 5/100ths. Isn't that cool how that works? Let's try this again. Let's try another one. Let's do 6/25ths. Express that as a decimal. Well, 25, which one am I going to turn it into? I can't turn it into 10. I could turn it into a thousandth, but closest will be 100th, right? And 25, turn it into 100. Well, I would multiply it by 4, right? 4/4. 6 times 4, 24. So 24/100ths. 24/100ths. Okay. So in summary, when you're trying to find a fraction and you're trying to turn it into a decimal, you need to try to multiply it by something to turn it into tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. And that way you can write it out as a decimal. If you have questions, post them. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.